This is Chapter 14, Delivery. We have 4 methods of delivery. First, we have impromptu speaking, and this is the presentation of a short message without any advanced preparation. We have a few different forms of impromptu speaking. They can occur when someone's asked just to say a few words at a toast maybe, or self-introductions in group settings are another example. Or if you just asked a question like, what did you think of the movie? That's an impromptu speech. For our purposes, we're looking at instances where you would be asked to speak without advanced preparation in more of a public context than an interpersonal context. We have a quick little step-by-step guide for impromptu speaking. First, you want to take a moment to collect your thoughts, plan your main point you want to make, then thank the person for inviting you to speak, deliver your message, make your main point briefly while you still cover it adequately, right? And you still want to do it at a pace your listeners can follow. Thank the person again for the opportunity to speak, and then stop talking. Sometimes we get a little nervous when we're impromptu speaking and we just keep rambling on and on and on. Not what we want to do. We want to say what we need to say, thank you, done. The next method of delivery is extemporaneous speaking, extemporaneous, extemporaneous. And this is presentation of a carefully planned and rehearsed speech spoken in a conversational manner using brief notes. And this is the type of delivery you should be using in this class. By using notes versus a full manuscript, the speaker can maintain eye contact, and they can kind of get feedback from the audience and adapt as necessary. Some advantages: it promotes the likelihood that you're going to be perceived as more knowledgeable and more credible because of that eye contact. And your audience is likely to pay attention better because of the message is more engaging, verbally and non-verbally, because you can look up and smile at them and nod and move around a little. Disadvantage of extemporaneous speaking is that it does require a deal of preparation, as you've probably found out in the speeches you've given so far. The third method of delivery is manuscript speaking, and this is word-for-word iteration of a written message. You just maintain your attention on the page unless there's visual aids which you point to. Some advantages: you can ensure that there's an exact repetition of the original words, and reading one word at a time, the only errors would typically be mispronouncing certain words or stumbling over some complex sentence structure or tongue twisters. Some disadvantages of manuscript speaking: it's typically an uninteresting way to present. Keeping your eyes looking at your paper precludes eye contact with the audience, and some speakers do use a teleprompter. That was boring, right? Because I was looking and reading. Now, if I look up and I'm talking to you using my carefully prepared notes, then we can have more of a conversation. So those are some disadvantages of manuscript speaking. With a teleprompter, they're generally designed for a specific speaking pace, or can actually be cued by someone behind it, and they can roll the words up more quickly if they need to be, or slow it down. A speaker can achieve a conversational tone and give the impression of speaking extemporaneously while using an auto cue device, and that's because it's in the lens. They put it in the camera and they can read it, and as they're reading it looks like they're looking at you. But if you look, especially I'm thinking like of celebrities doing like PSAs and stuff, if you watch their eyes, you can see them reading just a little bit. There's your homework. Go watch some TV and see if you can see people's eyes going just a little bit to read it. And also with teleprompters, they can be effective if the speech is written in a style that sounds conversational and not so stilted and formal. And the final type of delivery is memorized speaking. This is the rote recitation of a written message that the speaker has committed to memory. It can be useful when it needs to be exact and when the speaker doesn't want notes. So some advantages: obviously you get a lot of good eye contact. You can move freely around the stage, use your hands to make gestures, and you can work with visual aids a little bit easier because you're not worried about losing your notes. Now we have some disadvantages. Unless you plan to and memorize every vocal cue, your presentation will be flat and uninteresting because you're focusing so hard on just the words that you sometimes forget to add some inflection and maybe a gesture, something, movement. Spice it up a little. Another disadvantage, you might end up speaking in a monotone or a sing-song repetitive delivery type pattern. You might also present your speech like a machine gun, like rapid style, that fails to really emphasize the important points because everything just kind of sounds like this and then this and then this instead of how you would actually emphasize particular words. One of the main drawbacks of memorized speaking is that if you lose your place and start to ad-lib or try to fill it in, the contrast in the style of delivery is so noticeable. And if you go completely blank, it is so difficult to find your place and keep going. So you see a lot of advantages, a lot of disadvantages to the different methods of delivery. And so we like to focus on the extemporaneous speaking, speaking from carefully prepared notes. Now we'll talk about some speaking contexts that affect delivery. The first thing is using a lectern. And a lectern is a small raised surface, usually with a slanted top, where a speaker can place notes. Sometimes we call them podiums. So they can be a problem for new speakers, especially. They tend to grip the edges of the lectern, or they might tap on it, might be distracting. Lecterns also place a physical barrier between you and your audience, which can cause like a bit of a disconnect. Good lectern use, to do this, you want to limit your use of the lectern as simply a place to rest your notes. So you just put your notes on there and that's it. You're not hanging on to it for dear life. You're not resting on it. You're not hitting it. Your notes are there and that's what it's for, just for your notes to sit nicely. And you can try stepping to the side or to the front of the lectern when speaking with your free hands, and just occasionally standing at the lectern then to consult your notes or switch pages. Something else that can affect delivery is the small or large physical space. In large settings, you need to be aware that your voice might echo. You also want to speak more slowly than usual and make use of more pauses in large spaces. Your facial expressions and gestures should also be larger so people can see them. And presentation aids need to be large enough to be visible from the back of the auditorium or wherever you're speaking. Now, in small settings, it calls for more careful management of note cards and visual aids because your audience can see you more up close of what you're doing and what you're fumbling with, and if your hands are nervous or what have you. You want to do your best to minimize fumbling. You want to set everything up in advance so you're not clicking around and trying to find what you're doing. You just want to decide how to best organize your material in that space. Another speaking context is outdoors. If you're giving a speech in a setting that's beautiful, it can be difficult to maintain the audience's attention. They can pose also challenges with weather, sun glare, uninvited guests like pigeons or ants or bugs. And you'll need to use your best efforts to project your voice clearly without sounding like you're yelling. Another speaking context is when you use a microphone. One overall principle to remember is that a microphone amplifies. It doesn't clarify. So you still need to enunciate clearly, otherwise the microphone is just going to hear your mumbling like that you're usually doing. We do have clip-on microphones that you can use. It's worn in the front of your shirt. You really don't have to adapt much to them. You just have to avoid looking down because then your voice is amplified because that's where your mic is. Blah. And so you just have to talk normally and avoid that. There might also be a lectern or a handheld microphone. And if they're too close to your mouth, it can kind of screech. But if they're too far away, you can't hear. So you do have to get used to using them. The best plan, of course, would to have access to the microphone for practice ahead of time. And then the last context that affects delivery is the audience size. So if you have a small audience, it can be a more intimate, less formal tone. If your audience has only like 8 to 12 people, you can generate greater audience impact because you're right there, you're close. Now with a larger audience, it provides a less intimate, more formal tone, and you should just be guided as much as possible by your preparation. You get in front of a lot of people, you need to have a lot of preparation. Now, using your notes effectively is the next thing we need to talk about, especially with delivery, because if you're reading your notes, your delivery is going to suffer. Extemporaneous speaking utilizes notes to enable a speaker to speak in a more conversational manner. And using notes adds to your credibility as a speaker. It really does. It's sort of like when you're at a restaurant and your server doesn't write your order down, and it makes you really uneasy and nervous. Same thing when you're speaking. People like that you have notes. It makes you it makes it appear as if you have practiced, prepared, and you want to make sure that you're giving them the right information. I'm certainly not winging all these chapters. I have my own carefully prepared notes, so hopefully that appears more credible that I actually know what I'm talking about. I have a lot of experience up here, but at the same time, I want to make sure I get the content right, so I'm speaking from my carefully prepared notes as well. You also want to have carefully prepared notes so you're not tempted to read your entire speech. And the book does talk a lot about note cards and how they tell you to use them. In our department, we and many other professionals disagree and agree on different things. We prefer the use of sheets of paper with a nice folder behind them, perhaps, as long as it's just on one side. And we'll go through additional tips in just a second. But I have no problem with this. Now, let's see, I've got some note cards here. When people have their note cards, I feel like I'm at an 8th grade speech, flipping through like this. Now, note cards can be used effectively, but for the most part, it just looks like an amateur type speech. And so I prefer the professional sheets of paper with a nice folder behind it, or even this looks fine because it's clear. So different people have different preferences, and we prefer the full sheets of paper. So some key tips for using those notes. First, include only keywords, just keywords and phrases, not full sentences, unless, of course, you have a direct quotation. You want to make sure you say accurately. You want to hold your notes naturally. You don't need to conceal them from the audience. And that would be kind of awkward and distracting anyway. So, you don't need to hide them, and just hold them naturally, however you would. Or you can put this on the lectern and just have it there. You also want to avoid gesturing with your notes like this. I'm going to hold it and then gesture here. Now, if you're super nervous and you're shaking, this goes on the podium. Okay. The third key tip: prepare note cards to trigger recall. It should trigger information already in your brain. You should just have words that go, oh yeah, that's what I'm talking about at this point. And then you can talk about it. You have to do what works for you. And you always want to practice with your notes, with your speaking notes, so you get used to it. Next key tip, write in large letters, or you can print them off in a larger font size, just so you can look down at the card or your paper and look up. You don't have to squint and really look in there. And lastly, you want to use your notes effectively. If you lose your place or go blank, you just need a couple seconds to look at your notes and then go from there. I will say, the use of your notes also allows you to depart from exact wordings from your manuscript or from your full sentence outline, but still, and maybe adapt to the audience. So you can always come back because you know what's next, what triggers your next main point or subpoint. Next, practicing for a successful speech delivery, we want to use that conversational style, and this is the speaker's ability to sound expressive and be perceived by the audience as natural. It's a style that kind of approaches how you talk in conversations with friends, but not super formal. And conversational quality is the notion that a speech should sound spontaneous, no matter how many times an individual has rehearsed that speech. No one wants to hear a speech that's so over-rehearsed that it sounds robotic. Like I said, I call it radio announcer voice. It's no one wants to hear a speech that's so well rehearsed that it sounds fake. No, that's boring. When you sound conversational, people pay attention. You're easy to listen to then. Eye contact is another aspect of a successful speech delivery. You want to have visual contact with everyone in the audience. And this is one of the most important tools toward effective delivery and increasing credibility. Now, with faking eye contact, you might feel tempted to look at the wall above people's heads, and that makes people a little uneasy because they're like, who are they looking at? What are you looking at back there? So even right now, I'm looking just above the camera, and if you're watching me, you're probably like, that's a little weird, right? Because I'm not looking at you. I'm like, oh, I'm pretending. So give eye contact to your audience. Next is vocalics, or paralanguage. And this is a subfield of nonverbal communication that examines how we use our voices to communicate orally. And so this deals with volume, loudness or softness of a voice, rate, which is the speed at which a person speaks. And we do want to go a little more slowly during complex technical information or when it's new concepts. However, we can listen 4 times faster than we can speak. And so it's okay if you speak a little bit quickly. You just have to make sure you pronounce your words, which we'll get to in a second. But the rate at which, the speed at which a person speaks is the rate. Then we have pitch, which is the highness or lowness of a speaker's voice. And actually I don't want to say lower your voice, but low voices tend to be associated with high credibility. And so if you're someone with a really high voice, you should bring it down a little bit because you sound a little bit more credible. If you pay attention to the ESPN anchors, even the women, especially the women, have deeper voices because it makes them sound more credible. News anchors, especially the females who tend to have higher pitched voices, news anchors have the deeper pitch, the lower pitch. So something else to pay attention to. Next, we also have pauses. And these are brief breaks in a speaker's delivery that can show emphasis and enhance clarity of a message. So just giving a little pause can make people pay attention again, or it can really show emphasis. Now, this is the most important point. Pauses can be effective, something like that. We also have vocal variety. These are changes in the vocalics we've just discussed. So changing your pitch, volume, rates, pauses. Nobody wants to hear the same volume or pitch over and over and over again. Vocal variety should just kind of flow naturally with your own expression of the words. Pronunciation is another aspect of vocalics. And the conversational patterns of speech used to form a word is the definition of pronunciation. Conventional patterns of speech used to form a word. That makes more sense. Mispronouncing a word your audience is familiar with can really harm your credibility. So you want to look it up in advance to see how to pronounce the word. Or let's say you totally forgot to look it up in advance. You're in the middle of your speech and you get to the word and you're like, oh, I forgot to look this up. Just say the word. Say it with confidence and keep saying it that way throughout. Don't say, I think this is how you say it. I'm not really sure. No, just say it. Just use your confidence and go from there. Articulation is another aspect, and this is the ability to clearly pronounce each of a succession of syllables used to make up a word. Really, really enunciating and articulating and making all of the letters and sounds show up. We have some errors that occur with articulation. Substitutions are one, and this is when a speaker replaces a consonant or vowel with another consonant. So water might become water, or ask becomes ax. Those are substitutions. Omissions occur when a speaker drops a consonant or vowel within a word. So internet becomes init, mesmerized becomes memorized. Just kind of dropping a letter out. And it sounds similar, but it's just not the same. Distortions are the third type of articulation error. And this occurs when a speaker articulates a word with nasal or slurring sounds. So pencil might sound like mensal. Precipitation might sound like personation. It's more about like a mumbling, it's a distortion. And then the fourth type is the addition. And this is when a speaker adds consonants or vowels to words that aren't there. Like anyway becomes anyways, athletic becomes athletic. Just those sorts of additions. You're adding extra sounds where they're not supposed to be. And then we have verbal surrogates, which we've talked about before. Filler words used as placeholders for actual words. The like, and you might be able to get away with saying 2 or 3 times in a speech before it becomes distracting. But if you keep saying like, and well, I mean, then your audience starts to really pay attention to those fillers, and then they might count them and keep tally marks. So really be aware of those verbal surrogates. Next, we're going to talk about effective physical manipulation. And physical manipulation is the use of the body to emphasize meanings or convey meanings during a speech. With this, we have posture. And this is, if a speaker stands up straight, they communicate to their audience that they hold a position of power. So it's like, oh, I'm here, I know what I'm talking about. Versus if you're like leaning on the lectern and you're like, well, I'm going to talk about this. Your posture really communicates how you feel about something. Physical movement falls into this area as well. You do want to move during your speech, but you don't want to pace. And one common and easy method to integrate some movement into your speech is to just take a step or two every time you go from one main point to the next. And it can be during your transition. Now, the seventh thing I want to talk about is this. Blah, 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 blah. And then finally, my third point. You just make full body movements. And this kind of helps your audience know, oh, we're moving to a new point. We're literally moving to a new point. Then we have gestures as well. We want to use gestures effectively and avoid extremes, that's for sure. Gestures are just anything you use with your hands. You want to use them in moderation. You want to avoid other distracting movements. We have arm waving, fist pumping. Those can distract from your message and reduce your credibility. So you want to use gestures that seem natural. If you're saying 1, 2, the fourth thing, and then the fish was this big, like those things are useful. But if you've ever watched Rachel Ray, if you mute her at the beginning of the show, she is going crazy. Like it's almost sign language because each word that she says has a gesture with it. And it's just too much. So gestures are a big thing. You don't want to waste your opportunity. You still want to use them for emphasis, enthusiasm, connection, but don't overdo them. Next, we have facial expressions. Again, with gestures, you want to avoid extremes. You don't want to have a completely blank face that has no emotions while speaking, but you don't want to be like a cartoon character and be crazy, right? That was a little scary, I know. You just want to make sure your speech's content matches your facial expressions. So you don't want to be talking about someone dying while you're smiling. And you don't want to be like this if you're super excited. You should definitely go to Six Flags because it is so much fun. I love going there. I go there 10 times a summer. You don't want to do that. So you want to match it. Oh, I love going to Six Flags. Dress is another important part of how people perceive you. And again, credibility comes down to perception. Are you perceived as being credible? If you want to be taken seriously, you have to present yourself seriously. One general rule, and this is just good for life, is dress one step above. So you want to dress one step above your audience. You want to be one step above, you want to be dressed one step above whoever's interviewing you if you're going up for a job. So you want to dress one step above. In terms of avoiding distracting forms of dress, you don't want to do anything overly revealing. No over-the-top hairstyles or makeup. No jangly jewelry. They say don't display tattoos or unusual piercings. We're becoming a little more lenient with that, but I would still say if you've got use your best judgment, I guess is what I'm saying. Do what you can. I mean, we're all individuals, and I think you should embrace that, but you don't want to be distracting, okay? Self-presentation is the next thing we'll talk about, and this is determined by how you look, how you stand, how you walk, how you use your voice and gestures. And your self-presentation can enhance your message, or it can detract from it. And so you want your self-presentation to support your credibility and improve the likelihood that your audience is going to listen to you with interest even. And with variety, same as everything else, you want to include a variety of different nonverbal components and make sure that your face, body, gestures are all working in conjunction to support your message. And then you want to practice. You want to practice effectively. You need to practice with your nonverbals, with your movements, with your gestures, with your paralanguage. And some goals of practice are to identify weaknesses in your delivery, improve your delivery, build good speech delivery habits, think about ways of improving yourself, and seek input from others. And this is where your roommate or your good friend might come into play, because you can't see yourself as other people see you. One of the best things is to seek criticism from others. So practice your speech in front of someone and say, okay, what do I need to work on? And they might say, you said like 15 times, or you kept pacing, what are you doing? So you just want to ask them. Get a good friend who will help practice with you. You can also use audio or video to record yourself. So you can see how you're presenting your speech, you can see your mannerisms, you can hear your inflection or lack thereof. And you do have an opportunity during this class to do a self-assessment where you're going to watch a video of yourself giving a speech and then critique yourself. And then finally, good delivery is a habit. It's an activity that strengthens with practice, and it will enable you to make adjustments to your speaking notes as well, so then you can be more effective in supporting your contact with the audience because you're more comfortable with them, you prepared, you practiced, all that sort of thing. So that is chapter 14 on delivery, focusing a lot on the 4 methods of delivery and nonverbal components of it as well.